The signs of synchronicity are the consequences of the interference pattern generated by one's linguistic and interpretive framework, and consequently they emphasize and reiterate, through the use of vague metaphorical symbols and affective reactivity to certain stimuli, the consequences of both the flaws and the merits of the system. This is what we understand in more mundane terms, consequences to literally be anyway. A negative consequence is a reflection of some error within your approach to the problem or situation, while a positive consequence is a reflection of the current adequacy of your constructs. These signs, however, speak a language which reaches beyond the language your conscious mind speaks, which leads to the conscious mind failing to grasp what is being indicated, often ad infinitum. Therefore, the signs do not really mean what they appear to mean at first impression, because if that were indeed their meaning, then one would no longer need to see that particular sign anymore. You would already know what it means, and it would by now be unconsciously interpreted. The fact that the sign repeats itself is the basic evidence that its message has yet to be fully integrated into the psyche, because the psyche is still concerned with it, and is still seeking it out and finding it, showing it, as it were, to your conscious mind. The conscious mind, much like a dog with its owner, cannot see where the unconscious points. The unconscious has to thrust the sign upon consciousness, and it must be stubborn, insisting, no, this thing, you silly fool. We've done this all before. This thing. But the conscious mind never listens, for it does not know how. It has not yet learnt to recognize that particular sign in conscious language, and thus it knows not of which the unconscious speaks. Whatever your unconscious may show you in your dreams, it is certainly something of which you know not. Why else would you be so quick to dismiss it as meaningless, except that its meaning is so obscure to you as to be unrecognizable in your conscious language? Your conscious framework is best understood as the tip of an iceberg, poking above the water to look into the heavens above, yet part of an immensely larger whole with that same nature. The parts of the iceberg which are under the water may be hidden from the part which protrudes because of the reflection of the sunlight, but the mere fact that the depth of his immersion can change as the waves catch and toss him bespeaks his greater complexity, and it continues under the water indeterminably. Similarly, those elements of consciousness which are the lower half of the iceberg are capable of great depth and insight, and ought not to be ignored or treated blithely. This lower part of the iceberg is not part of the upper's experience, and does not even exist in the same world, nor speak the same language. Yet in thinking this way, the ego forgets that its conscious language is only the highest form of self-expression with respect to the ancient ancestral language which constitutes his biological and cultural origins, which are largely hidden in the depths of the arcane sea. This is the very purpose and point of the signs. It is the part they play in the drama of the individual life. They are our stage directions, to help us to write our lines along the same lines that life intended for us all along. These are the lines inherent in our nature. They are our natural form and our identity, of which the conscious ego is only the highest form of self-expression. The signs are the currents that move the iceberg from below, which guide it through the ocean and which operate beyond the conscious purview. This synchronicity is the consequence of the feedback loop that exists between the way you think and speak about the world you are experiencing and the experience that you have of that world. The recursion which belongs to the interference pattern being generated is the mechanism, as language itself only ever reflects what is, intentionally or otherwise. This, the underwater world of the unconscious, is the residence of Jung's primordial images, or the archetypes. This unconscious architecture is the basic precondition for the evolution of the language your consciousness uses, and therefore these archetypes are the lifespring of conscious experience. One's conscious language figures into the signs in their manifestations, but only to a limited extent. When stuck, the archetypal unconscious manifests. Jung writes, meaningful coincidences, which are to be distinguished from meaningless chance groupings, therefore seem to rest on an archetypal foundation. At least all the cases in my experience, and there is a large number of them, show this characteristic. Although anyone with my experience in this field can easily recognize their archetypal character, he will find it difficult to link them up with the psychic conditions in Rhine's experiments, because the latter contain no direct evidence of any constellation of the archetype. Nor is the emotional situation the same as in my examples. Nevertheless, it must be remembered that with Rhine, the first series of experiments generally produced the best results, which then quickly fell off. But when it was possible to arouse a new interest in the essentially rather boring experiment, the results improved again. It follows from this that the emotional factor plays an important role. Affectivity, however, rests to a large degree on the instincts, whose formal aspect is the archetype. There is yet another psychological analogy between my two cases in the Rhine experiments, though it is not quite so obvious. Those apparently quite different situations have as their common characteristic an element of impossibility. The patient with the scarab found herself in an impossible situation because the treatment had got stuck and there seemed to be no way out of the impasse. In such situations, if they are serious enough, archetypal dreams are likely to occur which point out a possible line of advance one would never have thought of oneself. It is this kind of situation that constellates the archetype with greatest regularity. In certain cases, the psychotherapist therefore sees himself obliged to discover the rationally insoluble problem towards which the patient's unconscious is steering. Once this is found, the deeper layers of the unconscious, the primordial images, are activated and the transformation of the personality can get underway. In the second case, there was this half-unconscious fear and the threat of a lethal end with no possibility of an adequate recognition of the situation. In Rhine's experiment, it is the impossibility of the task that ultimately fixes the subject's attention on the processes going on inside him, and thus gives the unconscious a chance to manifest itself. The questions set by the ESP experiment have an emotional effect right from the start, since they postulate something unknowable as being potentially knowable, and in that way take the possibility of a miracle seriously into account. This, regardless of the subject's skepticism, immediately appeals to his unconscious readiness to witness a miracle, and to the hope latent in all men that such a thing may yet be possible. Primitive superstition lies just below the surface of even the most tough-minded individuals, and it is precisely those who most fight against it who are the first to succumb to its suggestive effects. When therefore a serious experiment, with all the authority of science behind it, touches this readiness, it will inevitably give rise to an emotion which either accepts or rejects it with a good deal of affectivity. At all events, an affective expectation is present in one form or another, even though it may be denied.
Hey guys, thanks for watching that lecture excerpt. For more, subscribe to my channel and don't forget to check out my Patreon and my other work linked in the description below.